Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Beer-Braised lamb shanks. That's right, we survived another winter. And give or take a few White Walkers, it really wasn't that bad. But anyway, with spring currently being sprung, one food I'm always thinking about this time of year is lamb. And when you combine that with the fact that I'm pretty much always thinking about beer, the result was this very delicious, very easy, and extremely comforting dish. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with the star of the show, our shanks. And I'm just going to do 2 of them. And as far as portioning goes, 1 per person is perfect. And since these things require absolutely no trimming, we'll just go ahead and skip right to the part where we generously season with salt and freshly ground black pepper. And of course, we'll be doing both sides. But wait, there's more. Whenever we're seasoning a couple hunks of meat like this, especially if we're on butcher paper, once we've done both sides, what we want to do is sort of pick up the meat with our tongs, and then give it the old tappa-tappa on the paper, so that we pick up any excess seasoning with the areas that have not been seasoned already. So just a little possibly unnecessary tip for you. But anyway, we'll go ahead and season those up, at which point we'll head to the stove, where we're going to brown these up over medium-high heat in a little bit of olive oil, and hopefully some kind of deep-sided pan or pot, where our shanks just barely fit in a single layer. And if I remember, I will review pan and pot choices for this recipe on the blog post. But anyway, like I said, we'll go ahead and brown these over medium-high, which I will admit is not going to be the easiest thing in the world. Or if you had someone design a cut of meat with the purpose of being really, really hard to brown, they'd probably come up with a shape very similar to these shanks. Okay, so there's not really a lot of flat areas, which does make this searing a little bit more challenging. But don't worry, the good news is we don't have to really brown it that well. So we'll just turn that around the best we can, occasionally finding a flat or flattish surface. And even though we're not going to get that beautiful uniform searing we usually shoot for, what's still happening is that meat juice is caramelizing onto the bottom of the pot. And even though there's not a ton of it, believe it or not, that stuff is really what's going to add a lot of flavor to our sauce. So I gave those about 5 minutes or so, browning those to the best of my abilities. And then what we'll do once those look a little something like this is go ahead and remove those from the pan. And we'll go ahead and set those aside for a minute while we reduce our heat to medium. Because what we're going to do in this exact same pan is add some chopped up celery, carrots, and onions, along with some minced garlic, as well as the traditional giant pinch of salt. And what we'll do is cook this over medium stirring for a few minutes. And as you well know, that salt's going to draw out moisture from the vegetables, which is what's going to deglaze all that meaty goodness from the bottom of the pan. So we'll go ahead and saute that stuff for a couple minutes, at which point we'll add a couple teaspoons or so of tomato paste, which is not only going to add some important acidity to balance the richness of the meat, but it's also going to add to the overall gorgeousness of the finished sauce. So we'll go ahead and stir that in and cook that for another minute or so, at which point it's time for the other star of the show, 1 12-ounce bottle of beer. And yes, it is very suspicious I'm transferring that in using a measuring cup. But anyway, we're going to need some beer, and I will review all the acceptable choices in the post. And then we'll also go ahead and toss in a couple sprigs of rosemary, and we'll give that a quick stir for no apparent reason. At which point we want to crank our heat up to high so that we can bring this mixture up to a simmer before carefully adding our lamb shanks back in. And for good luck, we'll give those a quick toss in what we will eventually call a sauce. And then once that's been accomplished, what we'll do is reduce our heat to low, cover these, and let them simmer gently until very, very tender, as tested by you and your trustworthy fork. And it's going to depend on the size, but it's probably going to take about 2.5–3 hours or so. And since we aren't cooking these with a ton of liquid, I do like to turn these over after about an hour. And don't even bother poking these with a fork at this point, as they are still going to be extremely hard and rubbery. So we'll go ahead and give those a flip, and then we'll recover and continue simmering on low until, like I said, these are completely tender and ready to eat. Except that's not exactly what I'm going to do. All right, my preferred method for these is to cook them 2 hours the first day, and then let them cool and refrigerate them, and then finish the cooking the next day. So these are what mine look like after simmering for 2 hours, and they were almost, but not quite tender yet. So what I'm going to do, like I said, is turn the heat off and let these cool down to room temp before transferring those into the fridge overnight. And besides breaking up the long cooking time, I also think this method is going to produce a superior texture and flavor. All right, you know how people are always saying, oh, this tastes good, but it tastes so much better the next day. So this time we're just going to do that on purpose. But there's actually another big advantage, which I will explain after showing you what this looks like after a night in the fridge. And that is by using this 2-day method, it's super easy to remove that fat off the top. All right, once cold, that stuff really firms up, which makes it fairly easy to lift off the top. And by the way, that gamey flavor people associate with lamb, a lot of that comes from the fat. So by removing this, it does make the dish a little more mild. Of course, having said that, this step is optional, so you decide. I mean, you are, after all, the pat boon of your fat spoon. But personally, I do recommend it. And then what we'll do once our surface is sans fat is head over to the stove and place this over low heat. And we will slowly bring that up to a simmer covered. At which point we will give those a flip. And then all we have to do is recover these and simply simmer them on low until completely tender. And what we're looking for is the point where this meat is just about to start falling off the bone. Okay, it's not falling off yet. But the fork is going to go in very easily. And with just a little bit of effort, we could, if we wanted to, pull that meat cleanly off the bone, which is basically the condition mine we're in right here. And in case you're keeping score at home, that took me about 45 minutes to reheat and finish. And then what we'll want to do once our lamb is tender is go ahead and remove that from the pot, and then keep that warm while we raise our heat to high and reduce our sauce, which is only going to take a few minutes. So we'll go ahead and crank that up and reduce it by about, half maybe. And you'll see, even though we didn't add any starch, thanks to that sticky, gelatinous goodness from the meat and a little bit of broken up vegetable, by the time this is reduced by about half, it should have some nice body to it. And I should mention, because lamb shank is really a succulent, rich dish, I don't think it really works as well with a thick gravy-like sauce. Alright, I think something of this viscosity works much better. So I'm going to reduce mine until it looks a little something like this. And that's it. Once reduced, we'll go ahead and taste that for seasoning. And I decided to add a little pinch of salt and a shake or two of cayenne. And once that's stirred in, and we double check to make sure everything's tasting exactly how we want, we are officially ready to spoon that lusciousness over our lamb, which is hopefully sitting on top of some spring onion mashed potatoes. And while I was doing this, I couldn't decide whether it smelled better or looked better. So I had no choice but to declare that a tie. And then for a final touch, I decided to finish up with a few more slices of our spring onions, also known as green onions and scallions. And that's it. Our beer-braised lamb shanks are ready to enjoy. And don't let the knife fool you. All right, just using a fork, that meat should come off the bone very easily. And that, my friends, was an amazing bite of food. As I mentioned, lamb shank is very rich, very succulent, are just loaded with all kinds of sticky goodness. And like all shanks, no matter what animal we're talking about, it has sort of an underlying sweetness to it, which along with the aromatic sweetness of the vegetables, pairs perfectly with that subtle bitterness of the beer. So if you'll pardon the expression, I really do love the flavor profile here. And I know it does kind of look like a massive portion, but that bone and joint are pretty big. So I find the amount of meat you get off one of these the perfect size portion for one adult human. Oh, and speaking of bone, in case you're wondering, yes, it is completely acceptable to pick this up and eat it Renaissance fair style, like one of those ye old turkey legs. Just be careful not to drip it on ye old shirt. But anyway, that's it. My take on beer-braised lamb shanks. So comforting, so delicious, and absolutely amazing paired with these spring onion potatoes, which I really should give you the recipe for someday. Actually, you know what? I'll give it to you now. It's just regular mashed potatoes with a handful of green onions stirred in. But regardless of what you serve this in or on, I really do hope you give it a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.